Kia ora koutou katoa. Hello everybody and welcome to this community research webinar, Ngā Hua a Tāne Rore, the benefits of Kapa Haka. Rore, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Kay Marie Dunn, who will be your host for today's event. Kay Marie, kei a koe te rākau.
Kia ora. Tēnā tātou katoa, ngā tini me te mano kua tai mai ki tēnei whare whakahirahira, te whare ipurangi. Kia koutou, kua tai mai ki te whakarongo ki tēnei rangahau whakahirahira, ngā hua a Tāne Rore. It is with my great pleasure that I'm here to assist with this webinar today, and I also have the fantastic opportunity to introduce you all to our fabulous kairangahau and also our guest presenters today as well. But before we do that, I'd like to invite the new Executive Director of Te Matatini, Carl Ross, to open the session up with a karakia. Kei a koe te mana e te rangatira.
Kia ora mai no tātou te whānau, ko kei hia koutou. Nei kua maumahani ngā kōrero ngā tūpuna, nei kua whakawātea ngā mahi katoa i rungi i tāho tō tātou matunu i te rangi. No reira mi noi tātou. I hua ngā mano, nei au punanga e tuku atu ki a koe, hinoi whakawhetai mo tēnei rā. Nei te koropiko ana mātou ki a koe, mo tu ingoa tapu. Nei nā hau e awhina tia mai ki a mātou tamariki mokopuna, tairo hoki ki ngā kau mātou me ngā kuia. No reira I hua noho mai roto I tēnei wāhi kōrero, nei e aratakina mai. No reira I noana mātou ki a koe te ngā tautama I ukaraiti. Āmene. Nei hei tautoko mai ane ngā mihi kumihia, ane ki ngā kai rangahau. Ane ko kite ana I tēnei pepa, ane ko te whāreki mō tātou. He mea tino nui ki au, he tino nui ki te matatini. No reira huri noa, kia tātou katoa, tēnā koutou.
Kia ora. So joining us today, as you may be aware, we have Carl Ross, the Executive Director of Te Matatini. So thank you for opening us up with a karakia e te matua. We also have Ripeka Evans, who is the Po Ārahi Whakahaere of the Ministry of Culture and Heritage, who will be giving her views later on in the session about what is the research agenda potential and also some other possibilities as this research has been able to grow some legs since it was commissioned 2 years ago. So that'll be really fantastic to hear. We also have the privilege to be joined by Dr. Leonie Pihama, Herearoha skipper, and also Dr. Jillian Tipene, whom will give their feedback to us all as to the key findings of Ngā Hua a Tāne Rore. So please, as Jan has already said, if you have pātai questions that you would like to share, please do that via our Facebook page, Twitter, online, and we will be sure to try and encapsulate those as best as we can to our kairangahau, our researchers, whilst we're here together. So please make yourselves comfortable. I hope that we will all enjoy our session together. And before we start with our kairangahau, we're just going to open, again, invite Carl to just give some very brief insights as to why Te Matatini actually commissioned this piece of research and what they hoped to achieve as a result of that. So I'm going to pass the rākau back to you, Carl. Tēnā koe.
Kia ora tātou. The research that we have before us today is actually, I'm seeing it as a foundation document to a lot of things that we'll be looking into. I've only been at Matatini for a very short time, and what I've realised is that we don't really have evidence to take a report to take to government to say what is the fiscal contribution that Kapa Haka makes to our national economy. Being a person who's been in Kapa Haka for a while, I've seen the health benefits. This also outlines the health benefits to our people. So what are the positive contributions we make, Kapa Haka makes to the Māori Health Index? Groups getting to a national festival, it's costing a lot. The financial pressures on whānau is quite outstanding there. But we'll notice as the years go on, we'll always have the teams that turn up. This year, 48 teams have qualified for Te Matatini, which on a average figure from campaigns that I've been on the past could take the that number up to around 9.6 million. So the research for me has outlined so many areas that we need to do a lot more work in. And I'm keen, as the new Executive Director of Te Matatini, to follow through with some further research on this. Kia ora.
Kapa, fantastic. Kia ora kau, and great to have that strategic viewpoint, and in particular to ensure that this research can continue to grow and develop. And we're really looking forward to hearing more from you, Ripeka, as the discussions emerge. But without further ado, I'd love to open the floor to you, Dr. Leonie Pihama, as the rangatira of this work. Tēnā koutou katoa.
Tēnā koutou. Tuatahi tikana ki te whakahoki mihi atu kia koutou. Kia kōrero kāo rao ko Jan I tēnei ata nā koutou tēnei hui I whakatuwhera I whakarite, no reira tēnei te mihi atu kia kōrero. Kia koe hoki Ripeka, paitiki te atu I a koe. Tino hare ko tēnā koe kua tūhono mai koe ki tēnei o nā hui, rangahau. No reira tēnei te mihi atu kia koe te marae kura, koutou katoa. Kei Marie koutou. Koutou katoa hoki kua ari taringa mai, ari karu mai, kia mātou I tēnei ata, tēnei te mihi atu kia koutou katoa. So, kia ora. It feels like it's been a while since we did this particular piece of work, and I really want to initially, on behalf of our team from Te Kotahi Research Institute, acknowledge both Te Matatini and the Ministry of Culture and Heritage for really having the the vision to begin to look in more depth around the role of Kapa Haka, particularly in terms of the benefit and value to not only to our people, to our whānau hapua niwi and our communities, but also to the wider I guess national culture in terms of Aotearoa, and I think that's really clear in the research findings, is that a key benefit of Kapa Haka is to the country as a whole, to Aotearoa as a whole, and that it has a really strong contribution to make in terms of the future and the vision of where we go for future generations. So I do want to acknowledge both Te Matatini and the Ministry of Culture and Heritage, for that, and particularly you, Ripeka, for really taking the lead on the ministry side for this project and championing it through, really. The University of Waikato, through Linda Tuhiwai-Smith, Professor Smith's office, the Pro Vice Chancellor office, we have a strategic relationship with Te Matatini and have so for a while. And so we were honoured really to be able to contribute and support in doing this work. It is a scoping study, and so I really want to kind of emphasise it's a research piece of work around Kapa Haka. It's very much a beginning piece of work that opens a range of pathways for people to explore and to look at in terms of how we can engage Kapa Haka and the benefits of Kapa Haka more fully for our people in multiple platforms. And Jillian and Herearoha will talk about the key areas, but Carl really did indicate a few of them in terms of health, well-being, whanaungatanga, te reo, tikanga, those kinds of contributions, but also if we look at the notion of a kind of economic value, I think what the project does is raises issues around what we might consider value and how we might look at that. And Jillian will speak more to that. So I was asked to talk a little bit about the methodology for the project, and really I think there are two key, if we know kaupapa Māori methodology, we know there are a number of key principles. And I think there are two or three really key principles that came to the fore in terms of how we engaged with this project. Firstly, rangatiratanga, and that really is because the project was initiated out of the communities by which Kapa Haka is central to their lives. And that was brought forward through Te Matatini and through Culture and Heritage as two organisations that champion and that advance and progress Kapa Haka for our people and our communities, not just on a national stage in terms of matatini, the nationals, but across our community as a whole, from our kohanga reo babies all the way through. And so that notion of research being developed and the research aspirations and questions being developed by those who are of that community was really key. So in many ways, we at Te Kotahi facilitate a process where the research questions and the research ideas have come from the communities of interest themselves, or those kaupapa communities themselves. I think another couple of key principles relevant directly to this project were taonga tuku iho, of course, and whanaungatanga. So as we see Kapa Haka as contributing in terms of taonga tuku iho, those taonga from our tupuna, that Kapa Haka across the board is really critical in the revitalisation of te reo Māori, the well-being of whānau, knowledge of tikanga, but particularly around connectedness, the reconnecting of our people to each other, to te reo, to community, to identity, and the reconnecting of the role of whanaungatanga in terms of Aotearoa, the role that Kapa Haka has in terms of national identity that I mentioned briefly before. But also the method, I guess, was clearly a method of whanaungatanga, i.e. it was a scoping project. We selected, Te Matatini and Minister of Culture and Heritage selected 3 regions by which we would work, and we really relied on the Kapa Haka whānau to make access available to people who wanted and could speak to this kaupapa, and to really network it out. So in a Pākehā qualitative framework, some people might refer to this as a kind of snowballing process. But what whanaungatanga does is it lets us rely on our connectedness to each other to bring forward those key people who can contribute and who want to contribute as a part of that community, that whānau of Kapa Haka particular report or to the research at hand. I think the significance of this was really shown to us even prior to going in, when we look at something like the Te Kupenga report, and the Te Kupenga report from Stats New Zealand, close to 70% of participants indicated that they believe it's important to connect to Māori culture. So we already had a kind of statistical understanding that our people do want and do see that tikanga and ways of being Māori are important to our well-being and how we live as Māori in this country. And the other part of that outcome in terms of Te Kupenga was, 56% of the adult participants in that survey indicated that somehow they do, within their lives, they do some kind of activity that is somehow related to Kapa Haka in the broader form, whether it be waiata, haka, mihi, performing arts, those types of activity in their life. So we do have this really wide group of our people who may not be, i.e. on the stage, but have elements of what Kapa Haka presents to us in their lives. And so, that I think is a much broader audience that we forget when we think about Kapa Haka, i.e. in the performance stage activity, that there are a much wider group of our people who are probably like me, are the Kapa Haka mothers, children in Kapa Haka through kohanga, through kura, through Hawani Waititi, where my boys came, and now, their involvement in the tūmanako. So we've kind of seen our children go through Kapa Haka and have been a part of that economy that Carl talked about, the economy of every team bringing together funds themselves to actually get to regionals and get to nationals. So the economic component is also a component that contributes to a whanaungatanga way of being, and all of that is highlighted in the report. So I just wanted to kind of make those first opening comments, and we can talk a little bit more about that if people have questions in question time, but I wanted to hand it over to Herearoha and Jillian, who really did the research. My role was merely to facilitate the methodology and mediate across that particular part of the work. But actually the kanohi kitea work was done by Herearoha and Jillian. So kia ora tātou.
Tēnā tātou. Tautoko ngā mihi kua mihi ai Leonie, kia tēnā koe matua kao, nau i te whira tā tātou whakāturanga, me ki runga te ipurangi, he āhuatanga hau tēnei ki a hau, engari he pai tonu. Ko ai tēnei e mihi atu nei kia koutou, ko tainui te waka, ko hauraki te whenua, ko Ngāti Pāwa, Ngāti Tamatera, Ngāti Hako, Ngāti Tara Tokunui Tāwhaki, no Ngāpui Hoki tēnei, ko Herearoha tōku ingoa mihi atu nei kia koutou. Tēnā tātou. So I'll just carry on from Leonie's introduction and just give you a brief overview in terms of this, the methods that we also took in conducting and preparing the research project. So she explained that with the Ministry of Culture and Heritage and Te Matatini identified 3 particular areas, considering it was only a scoping project done back in 2014, and it was done over a very short period of time. So we were scoping some particular areas, so that we had visited a range of participants from Tainui, Aotearoa, me o Tautahi, and particularly o Tautahi leading up before Matatini was hosted in that rohe. So that was really good, actually visiting the participants and stakeholders in that rohe. So we interviewed over 58 participants, which was exceeded what was required of us. However, as we went through the process, we found that many people were more than willing to participate, and we had no problems in gathering a range of from performers, from Kapa Haka stakeholders, as well as holding a couple of other forums down in Wellington with government agencies and different organisations that also participated in part of that process, and being able to gather and collate all that information was really useful. So I'm just going to briefly look at contextualising Kapa Haka. What is Kapa Haka? And of course that would have been one of the first questions we would have put out to all the participants. And I think across the majority of our participants that responded to the question, it was quite resounding around the intrinsic link between culture and Māori identity. And Leonie also talked about whanaungatanga, the ability for those that were engaged about learning about themselves, particularly those that may not have been engaged with anything to do with their Māori identity or their culture, was actually an opening point for them. And then we had another range of people that also were entrenched and totally immersed in Kapa Haka pretty much from birth. So we had intergenerational transmission of Kapa Haka going through all the different participants of this project. Also, those living away from where they were from, they found participating in a Kapa Haka activity actually drew them closer to where they're from and their want and need to actually learn more themselves. And the whole whanaungatanga become quite obvious in that respect. It also came out of this research project was the well-being. So we found that, well, with a lot of Kapa Haka in the Rōpū, they do campaigns, so they become quite an event not only for the individual but for their whānau, for their hapu and for their iwi, and they looked at working more together in those, in that, and looking at the culture. The other part was looking at in the involvement. So of course it was 24/7. It wasn't something that our participants felt that it was a hobby. It was actually a lifestyle. So And like, as I mentioned before, not only had the grandparents participating in Kapa Haka, and it's quite a grown participation for kaumātua, participating in Kapa Haka, as well as tamariki mokopuna going right through the generations. So it's very intergenerational. It was a lifelong commitment, something that they would do day and night. And again, as mentioned before, it's linked to identity, linking them back to their marae and other parts, and linked throughout all the different communities, not just within the Māori community, but throughout Aotearoa whānui. So just trying to keep it as brief as I possibly can. I'm going to soon pass it over to Jillian, who will talk more in depth in terms of the research findings of these projects, and going into a little bit more detail for this project. Hoi anō, he mihi nui kia tātou katoa.
Ka pai, tēnā koe, Herearoha. Tēnā tātou. Tēnā tātou e hui mai nei. Anō hoki nā mihi ki koe matua kāo. Me nā mihi kua mihia tautoko ana. He uri tēnei no muri whenua. I te taho tōku kuia. Ko te raroa te iwi, ko te uri o hina te hapu, ko te uri o hina te marae. Ki te taho tōku koraua, ko ngā te kahu te iwi, ko ngai tohianga te hapu, ko ōturu te marae. Nō reira, tēnā tātou, nau mai, piki mai, whakatau mai. Happy to pick up here and have a bit more of a look at some of the findings that came out of this report. I would encourage anyone listening to pick up the report. It's available online from the Ministry for Culture and Heritage. Well, I'm a little bit biased, I suppose, but to me, it's to read. It's easy to read, and it just sings off the page. And the reason is the people that we interviewed were so passionate about this kaupapa, and as a result, we actually used big swathes of their kōrero, actual quotes from their kōrero, because we couldn't say it any better or any more profoundly than they were. Another thing that I'll just add in there is that we incorporated what we referred to as pūrākau throughout the report. So some of the stories we heard were so powerful, were so insightful, and of course they would be because we're talking to the most authoritative sources, the experts. So we included one whole page throughout the report of the stories that really demonstrate really conclusively that Kapa Haka makes an incredible contribution, an incredibly valuable contribution to Aotearoa society in all those three areas: culturally, socially, and economically. So I think both my aku huamahi have both touched on, well, actually, my first thing is the value of Kapa Haka. So we've talked about the unanimous and passionate conviction of all the stakeholders that we spoke to that, yes, without a doubt, Kapa Haka makes a valuable contribution. But the flip side of that was that many felt, in fact, half of them commented that Kapa Haka is undervalued. It's not given the respect and acknowledgement that it deserves as a cultural icon. It's misunderstood, predominantly by Pākehā, definitely by government, but also in some ways by Māori ourselves. We just not so much underestimate it, but take it for granted, perhaps, was the comment, that we take it for granted. So Kapa Haka is, for Aotearoa, it's our cultural identifier and our uniqueness, or rather for Māori, it's our cultural identifier and our uniqueness. And that strengthened identity for Māori, of course, has social benefits, many social benefits. But it's also a national identifier and arguably the brand of Aotearoa on the international, in an international forum. So there's enormous value attached to that. Identity, yes, we've talked about people who are living away from their home areas, being able to find refuge in a cultural, a cultural enclave like Kapa Haka. And also those Māori who have never been engaged with their Māori culture. It's an accessible, safe way for them to connect. So Kapa Haka is a vehicle for building and strengthening New Zealand nationhood, national identity, and that is 100% positive for Aotearoa. It's also the key platform, or a key platform, for establishing relationships with other iwi overseas. So people talked about there having been a gradual shift in the last 10 years to a kind of an environment where Kapa Haka and Māori culture is, has gradually become kind of normalized, particularly in the public sector and in the government sector. It's used in any sort of formal whakatau, pōheri. You'll see Māori culture there, and it's arguably quite tokenistic, the way that it's, utilised, but then sort of put away and not really talked about or engaged with. So, yes, Māori cultural protocols have become more a normal part of the social fabric of Aotearoa, but yeah, there was quite a few people that challenged that notion because of the fact that it is tokenistic. We've talked about whanaungatanga, so I'll just skip over that. Transformation was a really strong theme throughout the whole research. In the cultural area, questions of our participants, we talked to them, distinctly about cultural area, the social area, and the economic area. But there was an awful lot of transfer between those three areas. And whanaungatanga, identity and whanaungatanga featured strongly in all three, as did transformation. So I think the best way for me to talk about it at the cultural level was this one example given to us by a kaiako, who talked about a kura he was working in, and one day this 7-year-old boy, struts his way into the classroom with plenty of attitude, plonks himself down in front of the kaiako, doesn't, kare paku mihi, doesn't even acknowledge the kaiako, bangs his fist down on the table to get a bit of a reaction, I suppose. And a little girl sitting near him looks up and he goes, "Oh, what the F you looking at?" And so this guy goes, "Right, sort this boy out." And he said, "I'm going to introduce you to Kapa Haka." So 15 years on, fast forward 15 years, that same boy is now one of the leading choreographers in that kapa. He is training to be a teacher. He is married to the girl that he swore at, and they have 3 kids. So I guess the important thing was, as this kaiako said, I've got heaps of stories like that. That's just one, but the prevalence of that kind of transformation at a personal level. Revitalization, retention of te reo. Of course, Kapa Haka functions as a really effective vehicle for the revitalization of te reo, of tikanga, of ritual practices, and our histories. Many of those histories are embodied in our waiata, all those learnings, whakapapa, embodied in our waiata. Herearoha addressed the intergenerational transmission of reo tikanga histories, and we spoke to people who could even count 4 generations. I think one of the people that we spoke to, 4 generations in Kapa Haka, which is pretty amazing. One of the stories that we heard done on Ōtautahi was utilising Kapa Haka to build cultural capacity within their marae, and the idea that if we feed our babies with this knowledge, with these cultural taonga, we feed our babies, we nurture them within this environment, then they will feed their babies, and they will feed their babies, and these cultural taonga will be sustained. Haka also plays a big part in building confidence and culture. Oh, yeah, just spoke about that. Okay. Kapa Haka exponents as role models. So this is pretty immense. Role models of excellence, leaders and artisans. This is how these experts of Kapa Haka were referring to fellow exponents as leaders, as artisans, you know, trained over many years, trained from birth, nurtured and groomed to become leaders in their communities. That they were growing in numbers and that they're not hard to find. So it's not as though these are isolated people within various communities, but they're growing in number. So I'll tell you a little story a bit later on about how that could be, there's potential there to, you know, create something out of all that passion and power and expertise. Kapa Haka is a gateway for non-Māori into Māori culture. So we talked about that earlier, providing an accessible way for other cultures to engage with Māori culture in schools and workplaces. That's about relationship building. Pākehā kids in mainstream schools learning to poi, learning, you know, to haka. It fosters in them at least an acknowledgement, if not an understanding, but at least an acknowledgement that there's that Māori culture is valuable, and that that becomes then integrated in that person's well-being, pride and achievement in those tamariki, and then those kids are taking it home and showing their parents, and their parents then become more aware of Māori culture and the benefits of Māori culture. So Pākehā kids in secondary school really wanting to learn for their own growth as New Zealand citizens. So all these things are really, really valuable. And they just happen through Kapa Haka. So some of the challenges that were identified under this area of cultural contribution, the undervaluing of Kapa Haka, the lack of understanding about the art form, lack of understanding about the extent of training, the extent of commitment and sacrifice that people involved in Kapa Haka, the commitment and sacrifice that's involved in that. So I'll just add a few little excerpts in here because I think they're really cool. So one lady said to me, how long have you been preparing all these haka items? And I said, well, 3,500 years actually, just to make a point, just to make a point. This isn't something that we just throw together in 6 months. This is something that, you know, he taonga tuku iho, ko tupua ke au, I roto I tēnei āhuatanga o te Kapa Haka. Another challenge identified was that Kapa Haka may be seen as a Māori-only domain, and that perhaps Māori need to be a little more open to non-Māori being able to access it. Something to look at. I'm not sure that I agree about that. Social contributions. Very strong consensus that Kapa Haka provides many positive social benefits to Aotearoa. The role modelling, of course, the relationships, the links that the whanaungatanga that happens through Kapa Haka at a personal, at a national, at an international level. Social cohesion and resilience. Another reason that we were very keen to travel down to Ōtautahi, yes, they were the I forget the word, there's an English word for that, the hosts, they were going to be the hosts of the next Te Matatini, but we also were curious to see what effect, if any, Kapa Haka had in the wake of the earthquakes in Christchurch. And some powerful stories were shared of the significant impact that Kapa Haka did have. So just kōrero about people who were displaced as a result of the earthquakes. Of course, practices were disrupted, and so people were opening their homes or you know, working together to find places to practice. So it brought them closer together. So in a time of crisis, that community, which is your kapa, was had your back. You know, it was solid. There's also a story about a small iwi that was going through a process of re-establishing their connection and their cultural strength. They set up a Kapa Haka, and every weekend they run wānanga for all the rohe, all the tamariki, all the rangatahi and their rohe. And it's a very positive environment, of course, and it keeps those tamariki, those rangatahi, involved in positive activities as opposed to negative and risky activities. So social cohesion and resilience there. Leading right into it being a strengths-based environment for rangatahi. Building self-esteem and confidence. As I said, keeping them engaged in positive rather than not so positive activities. So that same story I've just told you, the weekends that wānanga didn't run for whatever reason, there was a big increase in cars being pinched and burglaries. So obviously it was a good thing to be providing in that particular community. Again, stories of transformation. Small town that had predominantly their culture, particularly on the weekends, was around league and drinking. Started a Kapa Haka, and there was a complete, reversal where people then were involved in health, well-being. It just changed their focus and changed their lives. So they go for 6 or 7 months on a campaign, and when by the end of it, they're like, oh, sick of the sight of each other. But then within a week, they're wanting to get back together again and re-establish that whanaungatanga. Work in prisons. We had a few stories as well about transformational outcomes. People who were incarcerated got involved in Kapa Haka, connected with their Māori identity, grew in confidence, grew in stature, and then upon leaving prison, sought out a Kapa Haka to connect to, become involved with. And also enrolled in the Bachelor for Māori Performing Arts and went on into tertiary education. So those kind of transformational outcomes are, legendary and so worthwhile. Health and well-being, thank you, my friend. Health and well-being, we've discussed it, Carl discussed it to some degree, but I'd like to just highlight that all of that health and wellness is happening largely because it's being achieved collectively. It's not one person doing it, it's a group of people doing it and supporting each other to do it. It's not just the kapa, but their whānau, I think you spoke about that, Herearoha, their whole whānau, and that then, sort of dominoes out to the community as well. Education, most of the people we interviewed, just coincidentally, were teachers or educationists in some respect, and were very, very convinced of the benefit of Kapa Haka to education. That whole thing of transferable skills, but again, the underestimating, or the, Kapa Haka in schools seen very much as a tag-on, something to be done after school, like any other after-school activity, and to choose. I want to do Kapa Haka, but if I do Kapa Haka, I can't play rugby, so I have to choose, and I'm going to go with rugby. So schools not having enough funding to support that program in their schools, but also not seeing Kapa Haka as a core part of the curriculum, where within Kapa Haka you can address, math, science, literacy, numeracy. It's all there in Kapa Haka, and many of the people that we spoke to would like to see Kapa Haka incorporated into the core curriculum, not be a tag-on. We need to get to the economic contribution. So it was difficult for a lot of the people we spoke to articulate from their lived experience the economic benefits of Kapa Haka, because in their lived experience, there hadn't been economic benefits. They talked a lot about the financial strain, the financial burden. They talked about the, the time away from their families. But in terms of economic benefits for them personally, it wasn't really happening. A couple of the people we interviewed were in some way or event management, and they were able to illuminate some of the ways that Kapa Haka absolutely does contribute economically to Aotearoa. And a lot of that was around the branding of New Zealand as a nation. Māori culture and Kapa Haka have had a very, very strong role in that. Offshore trade missions, establishing trade links with countries like China. Māori were very involved in that. Māori culture and Kapa Haka played a role in that. There's an enormous amount of economic potential to be mined from the value of Kapa Haka, but it hasn't been really explored. So I think that was an area that needs to be looked at. Is there a way to get more people to Te Matatini? Does it become a tourist attraction? How do you treat the art form as a tourist attraction without exploiting it? All these things need to be grappled with. I don't need to go there. At the end of the day, a strengthened sense of nationhood is an enormous value in itself. Tourism, Māori-owned small businesses that have grown up in response to demand from the Kapa Haka industry were cited. And also these things that were termed a silent economy that exists around Kapa Haka. So it's there, it's enormous, but nobody really understands it or talks about it. So when Gisborne host, Te Matatini or Tautahi or anywhere, you've got, in the case of Tautahi, $4 million just to get all the performers down there. So that money's going somewhere. Then you've got costumes, then you've got accommodation, then you've got, people need to eat. So they're going to be shopping in those supermarkets. So there's this enormous amount of revenue being generated by the event, but it's not actually being assessed or acknowledged or accounted for, or that sounds dodgy. It's not being noticed, highlighted, and added into the equation. Productivity, activity, all the volunteer work that people do, not the performers necessarily, but all the support people, koha, work in kind. It all has value because it's people's time and their energies, but there's no money exchanges hands, but it's still productivity, activity, and it still equates to value. So just finishing off with some of the challenges around the economic contribution. One of the major ones, and many people mentioned it, was, okay, we're talking here about economic value, but how do we measure the value? How do we measure the value of culture, of knowledge, of art? And how do we even define value? Whose idea of value is it? Lastly, sustainability. So there was a lot of concern amongst the exponents and the stakeholders of Kapa Haka that, all well and good, we all get really excited about Te Matatini and, Kapa Haka at the highest level of competition. It is breathtaking, it is inspiring, it is, in terms of well-being and the feel-good factor, it's way up there. But Kapa Haka exists right across the board, community level, marae, primary school, secondary school, all of it needs to be supported. All of it needs to be supported. And any support of Kapa Haka has to go hand in hand with an acceptance and an embracing of Māori culture overall as an integral component of New Zealand identity and nationhood. And there's a lot of work to do on that. So, koina. Koina tāku, kia ora tātou. I'll try that.
Oh, kia ora tātou. What a stunning presentation by the three of you. And so much data covered, and just as a scoping report alone, you were able to unearth so many extraordinarily important points around nationhood and nation building, education, investment. I particularly resonated with that piece around the silent economy, because there's so much work that goes into, around and post Te Matatini alone. But as you said, Jillian, across the scope where Kapa Haka exists, that is one of our key pinnacle events. But Kapa Haka is happening all over the place. And as our nation invests significantly in the All Blacks and rugby, what are we doing to invest significantly in Kapa Haka as an integral part of Aotearoa Inc. and our brand as New Zealand, nationally and internationally? So some fantastic points that you've raised. Tātou katoa, we have an opportunity for you to put forward your pātai, your questions. We have our Facebook page, which is live. We also have our live Twitter, which is being harvested right now. So if you have some pātai, we'd love you to bring some forward. And we're also shortly going to enable Jan to introduce you to some resources that community research have gathered as a part of this particular kaupapa, but also rangahau or research resources that you may find useful in your work as well. But before we do that, we do have a couple of pātai, a couple of questions that have come through. And the first one is from Alison Green, who says, the research was a scoping report. What plans exist to implement the findings across relevant policy sectors in New Zealand? Obviously education, but also other ministries. So I'm going to have that as a pātai for you as rangahau, but potentially Ripeka and Carl may also wish to chip in as well. So.
Yeah, kia ora tātou. I actually do think that is a Ripeka and Carl pātai. In terms of the scoping that we've done, I think we've laid out a whole range of areas that have gone to Ministry of Culture and Heritage and to Te Matatini, and what was really clear in our conversations across all the organisations at the end of the project was that Te Matatini and the Ministry of Culture and Heritage would lead off anything in the future in terms of development. So I think it's that particular question I think we should hand over.
Hi, kia ora. We were interested from the outset in three things. First of all, what was the intrinsic value, to try and understand what was the intrinsic value of Kapa Haka in and of itself, given that, you know, waiata and haka are traditionally seen as kind of highest forms of cultural expression. We wanted to try and find out how we were benefiting not just the performance itself, but also how we were benefiting society in terms of adding value in terms of the creation of different Kapa Haka institutions, of course. And we're also interested to try and find out what was the instrumental value of Kapa Haka. None of those questions have been answered, but what we were satisfied that we wanted to do was to make sure that we were going to cast the net as widely and as strongly as possible in terms of allowing Leonie and Jillian the kind of scope with these as professionals, as research professionals, to scope and to scope the framework for looking at the value of Kapa Haka in a way that was going to open the conversation with a number of other potential contributors. A number of things have happened since the commissioning of the research. Is co-commissioned from both the ministry, the arts policy team that sits within the ministry, and that team, Mary Don and Marie Brown, are the team that look after Te Matatini in terms of the ministry's investment. So we co-commissioned it with the then executive director and chair. We were keen that the research would also take on board a number of stakeholders. We've had a couple of meetings as recently as last week, of course, with the Ministry of Education, with their Māori Māori policy team, Mahina Melbourne and Nadine Miller, have picked up an aspect of the research to try and understand what are the success factors that then can create and drive other success factors. We're meeting with the Department of Statistics shortly to try and look at what are the kind of framing questions that will be the questions that will be asked in the next Te Kupenga survey, given that the Te Kupenga survey also have a whole set of questions about the positive benefits of Kapa Haka. So we want to try and create a family of interest here to ensure that there are other institutions that want to pick it up and drive the research both from the top down as well as from the bottom up to get some strong institutional policies around educational research, around the social benefits of Kapa Haka and around the well-being. And that then we can then begin to create a very strong evidence base for being able to say we can point to that piece of evidence that shows that we created, or that Kapa Haka, or the opportunity to participate in Kapa Haka created this success, and that therefore it's we can get a better understanding of what the kind of, if you like, the rate of return of the investment that is made, based on the fact that we have got not just behavioural evidence, but we've also got some outcome evidence that we can measure, and we can see that we can make sure that Kapa Haka is not just only about accessing Māori culture to ourselves, but also accessing it, as it does do, to all New Zealanders as well. So yeah, visionary piece of research, but it has grown legs, and we want it to keep walking.
Kapa, fantastic. And I really liked what you said, Ripeka, about increasing the family of interest, which will ultimately lead us to a family of investors. I'm hoping, particularly around growing this evidence base and how important Kapa Haka is to our people in so many different ways as well. Just want to acknowledge all of you out there in the cyber world who are contributing your pātai. They're fantastic. Some of them I think are more targeted to performers or performance questions. I'm going to pose those to Carl. But before I do, I'm just going to hand the rākau to Jan, who has some key resources that she would like to share with you so that you can, one, learn more about community research and what they do, but secondly, some pieces of research for those of you that love detail and want to know more about this kaupapa and others that are relevant to this sector. Kia ora, Jan.
Oh, kia ora, Kei Marie. At the end of this event, we're going to be writing to everybody who's registered, and we'll be sending out these links to you so that you're immediately going to be resourced for your further reading. And obviously, the first resource that I will commend to you is the document itself. And I'm just going to share my screen. This just takes me a moment now to do this, but it's hardly my space, as Whakahaere to say, but those of you who know me will know how satisfied I was to find such a great piece of research about culture that shows just how widely the benefits reach of culture. And also to see, as Kei Marie has said, this family of institutions that's come together to gather the evidence to make it more likely that each of these understand each other's policy positions, more likely that we use this evidence base to collaborate in the future to support this work. So I've been wanting for some time to share this piece of research through a webinar. Let me do this now. So if you go onto the community research website, we'll send you the link later, you'll find this. This is a place to find good community research and good community researchers. And you'll be able to download a copy of the report for free. So thanks to the researchers and to the two institutions for allowing us to upload to our website. For those of you who are interested in Kaupapa Māori methodology, as Leonie outlined, that was central to this piece of research, and here's Leonie's Rangahau website. More references, more resources to do with Kaupapa Māori methodology, and alongside it, I'll present to you the kaupapa Māori page of our website called What Works, and this is full of tools and resources to help you with your research and evidence gathering. There's some great links to kaupapa Māori resources here. Now, in terms of background reading, in fact, you could do no better than to read the literature review that comes with Ngā Hua o Tāne Rore. It's a fantastic literature review leading you to some really seminal pieces of research. But we thought we'd also draw to your attention Creative New Zealand's Health of Māori Heritage Arts Research Summary Report from 2009. That's a great read. And also from Creative New Zealand. Love this page. We'll send you a link, the evidence to support your advocacy. And it parallels what we've been hearing today. Look at this, the proof that the arts contributes to the economy, to educational outcomes, to highly skilled workforces. And as we scroll down, we'll see that gathered on this page are examples of research and also policy initiatives from around the world, where arts institutions are collaborating with others to show the value that they have more widely and to introduce the evidence in support of this. We thought this was really relevant to today's kōrero. And to take you one step further again, if you're interested in using your research evidence, we're going to share with you the link from Nesta, the practice guide. So this is really for the high level thinking about how we use our research evidence. Do you remember when I started this event, I said we use our evidence as a sector to give us hope and inspiration, to give us examples of what's working well so that we can share these more widely and to inform our policy for the future. Rore, that's just about enough from me, but the other link that we'll be sending you is to future webinars from community research. Thank you, Kay Marie, for giving me this chance to share. And now I'll hand back to you.
Ka pai. Kia ora, Jan. And, again, just some great resources that I hope for those of you that are in the sector might be able to find useful. I have been informed that the Rangaho research is just down at the moment. It's just getting some work being conducted. So do keep your eye on that website. I'm certain an announcement will be made potentially through our own social media networks when it's live again. But it is a fantastic resource for those of you who want to understand kaupapa Māori methodology and how you might apply that to your work with community, but also the staff that you are connected to as well. I'm just going to move on to a couple of pātai that have come through, and happy for our kairangaho, our researchers, to give your feed in. But I think that these actually performance-centric pātai. And the first one, and I may pose this to you first, Carl, which is from Celia Fleck. How might we ensure all schools in New Zealand can better access support for Kapa Haka and connecting across the curriculum? So that's an open-ended question. Anyone can take it up, but perhaps, Carl, you might want to take a stab at it for now.
Yeah, no, I will. And I'm just going to take one step back, if I can, at this stage, just to talk about the research, because it's really important. It leads into this pātai. Te Matatini has just completed a process of putting together a 10-year strategic plan, and within the strategic plan, it looks at how Te Matatini can encompass the wider audience. Mai ngā tamariki moko e pune I roto I ngā kohanga reo, tairo hoki ki ngā kaumātu me ngā kuia, anei ngā kōrero. Part of this is looking at our social well-being in Rangaho, youth leadership programs, and their scholarships, educational scholarships in Kapa Haka. So we've broadened out our whakaaro around looking at what Kapa Haka is, how we can help build our communities, and started to invest in there. So the area that we'd like to look at, our second tranche of research that's going to be very important to us, is in the social well-being area and the health of our tamariki, the health of our Pākeke, looking at some of the points that the research had brought up for us. What didn't only give us examples of what we need to do, but it actually provided real examples of what we can actually do right now. So it talks about the benefits of intersectorial collaboration. If we've got common goals, where can we work with that at the moment? And the Youth Leadership Creative New Zealand, ourselves, the Health Promotions Agency, and Te Wānanga coming together to promote Māori Youth Leadership Program. That's something new for us, and it's exciting, but that's come out from the rangahau that's come out from us today. Back to this question around our kura. We distinctively have 3 areas in Kapa Haka with our babies in our primary sector and our secondary and Te Matatini. And our kaumātua, the amount of our kaumātua that performed in our regional competitions, it was just absolutely outstanding. So kia au nei, kia whakakotahi ai ngā whānau katoa. Would I like to see our senior top group performing on the stages of the secondary festival? Hell yeah, I'd like that, and vice versa, to be able to provide that as come out in the report here. When we're talking about finances, how Matatini at the moment sponsors the secondary festival and sponsors the primary, so it's all about the sponsorship. I'd actually like to see a of everyone coming together. He waka kotahi tēnei. I've heard people say that Te Matatini is the waka that's moving forward. Heck, I see Kapa Haka as the waka, and we're only a little part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. The waka concept was the concept that frames the piece of research that the Ministry of Education have picked up, looking at Kapa Haka as a waka for identity, culture, and language. So taking each of those aspects forward and trying to find some way, I guess, with the preliminary piece of research that Nadine Miller's done at Ministry of Ed in Mahina, Melbourne, is really looking at a way for trying to find an entree into the kind of policies around success breeds success, and then trying to find a way for framing some new policies in regard to the inclusion of Kapa Haka as a core curriculum, core curriculum in the education group. And we talked about things like, boards of trustees are kind of independent identities, but trying to create a kind of collective consciousness so that we can kind of come at it from a number of different angles. I think that's probably one of the challenges that not just Matatini, but really that really are part of an agenda, I guess, that should be created, a wider agenda around schools and the schooling system needing to understand and adapt how much ownership they're going to take from it. You need policy drivers, you need evidence with all policy. Whānau order needs evidence to be able to also understand how it can better support, I would have thought. Kapa Haka as well. Given that, the kind of beauty of the All Blacks as ambassadors for the art form is that it suggests that if a national platform was created and it was institutionalized in the school curriculum, that would create an opportunity, I think, for creating a platform of success. I mean, that is part of one of the avenues that we want to see the report go down is really that providing that evidence that yes, this leads to success. This is the pathway to success once you're assured of your identity, your language and your culture. You got more chances than one of succeeding. It's the old, Apirangata's mantra of knowing and understanding your own culture, and that gives you a better understanding of how to succeed, a better pathway, creates a better pathway to success.
Yeah, can I jump in for a moment?
Sure.
Yeah. And I'm sure Jillian will want to follow on from me too, but because I want to pick up on that point that Ripeka just made, and that really is what the scoping has done. It's really showed the vastness of the contribution of Kapa Haka to wellbeing across multiple platforms. And so education is one. And so, you know, some of the educationalists that talked in the interviews talked about, you know, rather than seeing Kapa Haka as an add-on that you do at lunchtime and after school and in the weekends, it needs to be seen as a kind of pedagogical tool for teaching. Because within Kapa Haka, there are a range of things that can be taught and learned. And so it is a pedagogy in itself. And so I want to really pick up on that point that Ripeka was making around there needs to be a greater awareness of how Kapa Haka across the range of areas. I mean, one of the things we haven't talked about so much, but was raised, was that point again Ripeka made around, you know, the All Blacks as ambassadorial to some extent in terms of the haka, but that, you know, people did talk about the uniqueness and distinctiveness that Kapa Haka brings to national identity. And so it brings it in multiple ways, and connecting us to ourselves and connecting us to each other as people who live in Aotearoa, connecting us to other Indigenous and global international nations. And one of the things that came through the stakeholder group really clearly was that kind of culture to culture interaction in terms of how we talk to each other in that kind of trade space or in that international space, and how those elements of Kapa Haka contribute to the ability for us as Māori to bring our cultural ways of being to the fore in those discussions. And that often people were seeing that as Māori in an international economic sphere or a trading kind of component, we would talk culturally in ways that meant we had a kind of culture to culture interaction with many other nations. And so I think it, you know, the report does really give a very broad way around how Kapa Haka is a way of connecting, of reconnecting ourselves to ourselves and our ways of being, but also of connecting us to others. And that it does play a really integral part to the potential for the future, the potential for Kapa Haka and the many components of Kapa Haka to contribute as we move forward to be building, some would say, a new nationhood. Others would say we're returning to an old way of being and bringing it into a contemporary sense, bringing that way of looking at what Aotearoa, the distinctiveness of what Aotearoa is, both in terms of culture, in terms of language, but also in terms of our interactions internationally with others. So I think, you know, those are really important things, but definitely about this scoping report, and I want to go back to the very first point I made around research, Māori research and methodology, and the notion of rangatiratanga, the notion of communities of interest, or those whānau hapu iwi or organisations leading off their own research in a way that suits them. And the fact that we can have a piece of research that's done that actually from this point on, apart from really talking about the outputs and the methodology and the methods and the ways we did the research, in many ways as an organisation, Te Kotahi were not required from this point on, that we were asked to do by the organisations that wanted the work done and the questions that they wanted raised. And I think for me that's a kaupapa Māori research project, because Ministry of Cultural Heritage, the team, Ripeka, Mary and others, and Te Matatini with Carl and your team, you know, this is your work now that you've clearly taken forward into other ministries. And for me, that's a really good sign of a strong, collaborative kaupapa Māori research process, is that it gets taken back, the ownership is taken by the organisations who actually own the kaupapa. And we as a team can step aside and just contribute in things like this where it's useful. But the future of this particular project really is with the community that the research question and kaupapa was born from. And so I think really just this is a great exercise, I think, for us to do as a research team, because it really indicates that actually this collaboration has worked really well. And we've done what we needed to do technically as a team, and have total faith that the future of this project is now with the people it should be with. So kia ora tātou.
Kia ora. And Jillian, did you want to add to that as well?
No need. I think that's
Kapai.
well covered.
Awesome. All right. Well, we've got a couple more parto that have come through, and I think it's quite pertinent for everyone here, which is asking the recommendation. So Annette Wehi has asked that all of the recommendations that have been made in this report, and Ripeka touched on it briefly about the Ministry of Education picking up some of them. Are you aware if anyone else has possibly taken some of these recommendations on and utilised them in their work since this piece was commissioned?
Well, we're having a conversation with the Department of Statistics shortly, the people who are responsible for bringing together the Te Kupenga survey, and of course people that will be for the next census. But the Te Kupenga survey, of course, is done every 5 years now. And we're interested really in a kind of the continuation of the collaboration in terms of making sure that there are strong questions, really good questions asked. And of course, you know, we've only got a very, very small research capacity. In fact, it's probably one person in a very small ministry, so there's not all that. We don't have a great research capacity, but we do have a very strong intention to make sure that that we pursue the research partnerships or the potential research partnerships that could emerge from this, and we will want to keep engaged with Te Kotahi Research Centre, so you're not off the hook completely, Leonie. And that in terms of making sure that we've got the continuation of that partnership, and then of course like any other kind of relationship around research, it'll be based on a research partnership, a research relationship, wherever that might go to. So we're certainly interested in taking the next steps with statistics, and really in kind of guiding the research, and that might be picked up through both education, certainly through health. I think there's a big conversation to be had with whānau ora around framing, and framing of opportunities for supporting also different aspects of Kapa Haka. There's a conversation to be had with some of our other agencies, and great that this is promoting and perhaps as an entree for projects and for work with Creative New Zealand and forming those partnerships that Carl talked about with the wānanga. We had a wānanga with Te Wānanga, Whare Wānanga o Awanui Ārangi last year, who've got a lot of invested. They've got a lot of intellectual capital invested in Kapa Haka. And so that's an aspect of research, of course, that, you know, the different educational institutions and that will pick up, and that across the board. So we're interested in keeping the ball rolling in partnership with Matatini, of course. Matatini has a mandate, and this is where we put our primary investment in terms of investment in Kapa Haka across the ministry. I'm not sure, there's quite a big group, if they're still there at the ministry online, but they might want to kind of key in some questions or chime in and say something as well.
Kapai. Now we're just close to wrapping up our kōrero. We've got a few more pieces that we wanted to cover off, but I also just want to acknowledge our sister Whetu Whala that's watching as well. She did ask Carl if this research could end up with compulsory Kapa Haka in schools, which would be awesome. But I think that connects really nicely for those of you that have not had an opportunity to read this report yet and are wondering, well, what are the steps that I could take as a community researcher, or how do I get involved or engaged, is to look at page 70 of this report and look at the key recommendations that the Kairangahau have actually put forward in regards to further pieces of research that could be done, which I think would be really powerful for you to actually read and look over, because these are questions, as Leonie said, that are now for the community to pose within themselves, but also other organisations that might be able to contribute to this piece of work, continuing to grow legs and start running, with, of course, our people at the helm as well. So that it would be fantastic. Jan, would we like to also just briefly talk about the value of research, and also give our team here an opportunity to wrap up around the future research agenda?
I think that's a great idea, Kay Marie. And in fact, let's just open the floor. I think it's a really apt closing question for everyone. I should be really keen to hear your take on the value of research, because community research is all about, as an organisation, we're all about supporting groups, because we think if we do our learnings well, we'll do our doings well. So to us, that's the value of research, is that we're all in the business of gathering knowledge. We're all in the business of gathering, may I say, mātauranga, the knowledge that means that our practice is better informed. So Kay Marie has just asked if maybe we'll just have that as our closing question to each of you. What to you is the value of evidence? What's the value of evidence in our practice? Perhaps pass that to Waikato first of all.
What is it again? The value of research?
Evidence to our practice.
Oh, the value of evidence. Well, for me, in a kaupapa Māori space, that evidence is the authoritative knowledge that's given to us in that exchange. So talking to people who, you know, I sometimes struggle a little bit with this thing that Kapa Haka is an art. It's not just an art, it's who we are, and it's a lifestyle, as you know, as all these people have said. There's tangible and intangible elements of that. We want to measure the value of it, but it's intrinsically connected to Māori culture and being Māori, and so yeah, just sort of calling it an art, so it just seems a little bit selling it short. But the evidence in this case, I think in this report, is the stories that were told to us, the experiences of people's lives that were shared with us. They are authoritative, they've come from experts, and as far as I'm concerned, they're evidence. And the value in that is that we're enlightened, and our wairua is lifted, and yeah, we feel privileged to have been allowed to access those insights from experts. Koina tāku.
Just briefly, also agree with what Jillian was saying. When we conducted the research, a lot of the participants actually got excited because they've never had the opportunity to actually talk about this kaupapa. They live it, they breathe it, they do it 24/7, from mokopuna right up to kaumātua. But the opportunity to actually talk about the project and actually to provide some defined pātai to them, and for each of the participants to think about those pātai. So that was really great, having them to participate, but more importantly for them was the ability to talk about this kaupapa. And just leading on in regards to some of the outcomes from the research, we have seen an increase of masters and doctoral students actually picking this up as a kaupapa. Jillian talked about those that have engaged with education, not only doing the bachelor's, but also pursuing a master's and PhD, which is something they wouldn't have even contemplated had they not thought about Kapa Haka as their kaupapa to actually do further research for their thesis writing. So it has had a huge impact on not only ourselves as kairangahau, but also on our participants and their whānau and their hapu and the benefits that it brings back to the iwi. Kia ora.
Sure, well, I could do a 90-minute webinar on this question. Because there are multiple layers in terms of the value of evidence-based. I think one of the things that, particularly for us, is actually the value of a kaupapa Māori approach to an evidence-based. So that, for me, is really critical. But if we thought about, potential outcomes, they are really multiple. It's about sharing, it's about affirming, it's about being acknowledged, it's about an opportunity to speak and to add your voice to a particular kaupapa. It's about validity. It's about the ability, in this particular context, I think it gives a strength and an ability to organisations like Culture and Heritage and Te Matatini to progress and advance a kaupapa that's really important, and gives enough of a baseline, baseline evidence for them to then move forward and progress this on behalf of our people more fully across the sector. So, there are always these kind of multiple layers in which evidence-based work and research contribute. So that what we have is that we have a piece of work that opens some gateways for the organisations to move forward and to take at least, as I said, a baseline evidence document with them in terms of negotiating and advancing this kaupapa in ways that we know that it can contribute much more significantly, in terms of whānau hapu iwi, community, regionally, nationally and internationally. So, kia ora tātou.
Yeah, I think Kapa Haka is important from both in terms of what Leonie was talking to about before, about the true value, or one of the true values of Kapa Haka is around it creates, it is part of that whole kind of intrinsic, distinct New Zealand identity, or our distinct identity as a nation, that not just accesses Māori people to our own culture and our own ways of being and knowing about being Māori, but it also accesses arguably also all New Zealanders to our culture. And that's really important. That's particularly important for the ministry's perspective, because it is a gateway for New Zealanders to participate. We had a high degree of participation. That was one measure that we did measure in the last Te Matatini festival. We got on board. When we think of partnerships, we don't only think of government institutions, we don't only think of other ministries, although that's important because they are potentially the bigger kind of in longer term investors. But we also think of regional government, regional councils. Waitaha Council participated in the research that we did to try and find out whether or not there was more engagement in Matatini by other people from other New Zealanders in Matatini. And I think that small data set that we have was that there was a higher degree of participation, because it was that was a perspective of that the Waitaha District Council wanted to measure. And we wanted that measured in that as well too. So we want to find out increasingly how Kapa Haka is an opportunity for all New Zealanders to engage in Māori identity. It's really accessible. And if it were made available, particularly in schools and through other fora, we think that it would also intensify and add greater clarity as to what organisations saw was the measurable value, and that of Kapa Haka. I mean, Casey and Karina are selling it now on their kai cart and their walks and talks around Asia and around New Zealand's trade sites. So we see that as an opportunity too for a conversation about Kapa Haka in terms of not just tourism, our partnership, our trade partnerships, but also as an opportunity for kind of selling that total New Zealand New Zealand Inc., Māori Inc. story around the true value of Kapa Haka. So it's a big story to be told, but I think the focus where some of the research, the important research and the important policy initiatives are happening is really around promoting the relevance of Kapa Haka to the up and coming, the younger generation. And we're interested in a number of aspects of research, but really getting some kind of core policies to make sure that Kapa Haka becomes a perpetual story for identity. And so we're interested in a number of angles, but we want to see this live, walk and talk. We're interested in institutions walking the talk, but we're interested in enabling lots of action research and lots of activity at the community level to create clusters of action research groups that are clustered around schools, around kura, around institutions that are the kind of, the kind of innovated clusters that we have, but to supporting those activities and then working through the institutions that do have control over core curriculum and working with those institutions to get this on board. So a combination of a top-down, bottom-up approach to making sure that action research is taken universally.
Kia ora tātou. Yep, sure. Kapa, just quickly, kia koutou mā, ngā kairanga hau, anei te mihi nui kia koutou. Quick comment, it's important for Te Matatini to move forward with our research, and kaupapa Māori theory is our platform, and it has to be our platform. In the years gone by, we've been able to look at groups, Indigenous Research Institute, Nāne, ko taitanga, koutou mā, e hara te kōrero ko whakahihi kia koutou, but moving forward with our partners in research is important for us because it holds the mana with government, and that's how we would like to move forward. Anei, ko timate I te karakia waihonga whakaro ki rātou mā ngā tūpuna, pāpā, tairo hoki ki rātou katoe, he tautoko mai, marātou mai waihonga ohaki mai kia tātou te Kapa Haka. Huri no, kia ora mai.
Kia ora.
Just want to say thank you for being here. It's been awesome insight into this mahi whakaherehera. And thank you to our kairangahau, thank you to our guests who came specifically for this event, and for all of you that have come together to watch and participate in this session. We're really grateful. We have gone a little bit over time today, but to wrap up, what we would like to do is we'd like to show you a 3-minute video on behalf of community research, which just gives a little bit of insight into our mahi. And before I do that, I also want to promote an Indigenous gathering of researchers called He Manawa Whenua. We'll have a link about this particular event on our Facebook page. But for those of you that want to learn more about kaupapa Māori methodologies and Indigenous researchers, we would strongly recommend that you check this event out and mingle and mix with some of the greatest minds in Aotearoa and the world. So kia ora to our team. Take care, everyone, and enjoy this video. Ka kite.
Ka kite.
The Community Research website offers a hub for good community research and researchers. It's the place for the public to find and share evidence about effective community practices. The website collects research and evidence and organises these so that they can be easily accessed and used by other groups. You can access this research and browse by category, by a list of quick-link topics, or by searching for something specific. All of the research is free to download. The Community Research site is all about excellence and effective practices. You can view recordings of past webinars and find out about future ones. The webinars share evidence about what's working in the community sector. Published by Community Research in 2007, the Code of Practice provides the standards and guidelines for doing research. It's the place to start if you're thinking of undertaking research with or in a community or iwi. As well as the collection of research, we keep a register of experienced researchers who are skilled at working with iwi and communities. To find a researcher who can help you, we have a filter system which allows you to find people based on location, qualification, ethnic group, and area of expertise. The Community Research website is a unique resource for the community sector to use and share. It matters because communities who learn well will do well. It matters because it evidences what's working for us. For researchers and community people alike, we've made it as easy as possible to share your research on our website. Kaua e whakama. Uploading material is quick and simple. Save your work as a PDF and head over to Share Research. Answer a few questions that help us tag and organize the research so it's easy for people to find. If you're a researcher and skilled at working with communities, you can add your details to the Directory of Researchers so that you can be found. Community research keeps you updated and informed. This helps make you more effective. If you want to stay updated about the latest research, informed about new resources and our upcoming webinars, head over to sign up for our e-news on the homepage. Community research is a rich resource built for and by the community. For it to reach maximum potential, we rely on you to contribute, participate, and support the resource to grow and thrive. Mā te kotahitanga e ora ai tātou.